I need to see your ID before I serve you.
You don't want to do this. You'll regret it. This place will be closed soon. Mark my words.
Is that a threat?
It's a promise.
This is what I'm dealing with.
Paul Richardson had just left a successful business meeting downtown and was looking for a place to have lunch. It was 2 p.m. on a hot Tuesday in July, and he had spent the last 3 hours presenting a marketing proposal to an important client. Paul was 38 years old, worked as a digital marketing consultant, and wore a well-tailored gray suit with an impeccable white shirt. He had seen the Italian restaurant called Maria's Trattoria several times when driving by, always noticing the 5-star reviews in the window and the handwritten menu on a board outside. It seemed perfect for a quick lunch before returning to the office. Paul opened the glass door and entered the restaurant, being greeted by the smell of garlic, basil, and fresh bread. The place was small but charming, with about 10 tables covered with red and white checkered tablecloths. The walls were decorated with photos of Italy and strings of lights that gave a cozy atmosphere. There were only 3 other occupied tables, all with customers who seemed to be enjoying their meals peacefully. Paul chose a table near the window, placed his laptop and phone on the chair next to him, and picked up the menu that was in a metal holder in the center of the table. Everything seemed completely normal and ordinary. Maria Castellano was the owner and operator of Maria's Trattoria for 10 years. She was 46 years old, had immigrated from Italy at 21, and had built the restaurant from scratch with loans and relentless hard work. The business had a solid reputation in the neighborhood, known for homemade pasta and friendly service. Maria was in the kitchen when she heard the doorbell indicating a new customer had entered. She wiped her hands on her apron and came out to greet the newcomer, as she did with all customers. But when she saw Paul sitting there, something changed in her expression. Her welcoming smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of suspicion and discomfort. Maria approached Paul's table, but not with the warm energy other customers had received. She stopped about a meter away and asked if Paul had a reservation. He looked up from the menu, confused because the restaurant was clearly more than half empty and didn't seem like the type of place that required reservations on a Tuesday afternoon. Paul said politely he didn't have a reservation, but hoped there was space available, gesturing to the empty tables around. Maria hesitated, then said the restaurant was actually fully booked for the rest of the afternoon and couldn't accommodate him. Paul looked around the empty restaurant again, his confusion turning into slow and uncomfortable understanding of what was really happening. Paul asked directly if Maria was saying she wasn't going to serve him. Maria didn't answer the question directly. Instead, she said she had the right to refuse service to anyone, that it was her private property, and that she determined who could and couldn't eat there. Her words were legally correct in technical terms, but the context made the discrimination obvious. Paul remained seated, making no move to leave. He said calmly he understood private businesses had certain rights, but that refusing service based on race was illegal. That he was appropriately dressed, had money to pay, and had done absolutely nothing to justify being refused service other than being black. Maria became visibly agitated. She said Paul was making accusations that she would never discriminate against anyone, that she had customers of all races. But Paul pointed out that all the other customers in the restaurant at that moment were white, that she hadn't asked any of them about reservations, and that the only difference between him and them was obvious. Maria then did something that would seal her own fate. She pulled out her cell phone, opened the camera, and started recording Paul. She said he was being disruptive, that he was falsely accusing her, and that she was documenting his behavior for her own protection. Paul couldn't believe what was happening. He was being filmed for being discriminated against, as if he were the problem instead of the person refusing to serve him without valid reason. Paul pulled out his own phone and started recording too. He said calmly to the camera he was at Maria's Trattoria, that he had come in for lunch, and that the owner was refusing to serve him for no reason other than the color of his skin. That the restaurant was empty, but she claimed it was fully booked, that he had done nothing disruptive or inappropriate. Maria saw Paul recording and became even more irritated. She said he didn't have permission to record on her private property, that he needed to turn off his phone and leave immediately. Paul responded he was in a commercial establishment open to the public and had every right to record, especially when being discriminated against. The other customers in the restaurant were beginning to notice the commotion. An older woman at a nearby table looked uncomfortable, murmuring something to her companion. A young couple stopped eating and watched with confused expressions. Maria realized she was losing control of the situation in front of her customers. She lowered her voice slightly but kept the phone pointed at Paul. She said he was disturbing her other customers, that if he didn't leave voluntarily, she would call the police. Paul said calmly she was free to call the police, that he would be happy to explain to officers why he was being removed from a public restaurant for no reason other than his race. Maria did exactly that. She called 911 and reported she had a customer refusing to leave her property after being asked to depart. The dispatcher asked if the man was being threatening or violent. Maria hesitated, then said he was recording her without permission and refusing to leave. The dispatcher said officers would be sent to assess the situation. Paul remained seated calmly, still recording, waiting to see how this would unfold. He knew his rights. He knew he had done nothing illegal, and he knew the arrival of police would likely expose Maria's discrimination even more clearly. While they waited, Maria made another catastrophic decision. She stopped recording Paul on her phone and went to the register where she had a tablet. She opened Facebook, went to the restaurant's business page, which had over 4,000 followers, and started a live post. Maria appeared on camera, her face red with frustration, and began speaking to her followers. She said she had a customer in her restaurant who was causing problems, refusing to leave when asked, making false accusations about discrimination. That she had worked hard to build her business and didn't deserve to be attacked this way. Then she turned the camera to show Paul still sitting calmly at his table. The Facebook Live was being watched by dozens of people in real time, a number that grew every second. Comments began appearing, some asking what had happened, others defending Maria, a few pointing out it looked like Maria was recording a customer against his will. Maria read some comments aloud, selecting those that supported her, using them as validation. She told viewers Paul had entered without a reservation and became aggressive when she explained she had no tables available. But her own camera betrayed her narrative. As she spoke, the live stream clearly showed multiple empty tables in the background, including the table where Paul sat peacefully with his hands visible, showing no aggressive behavior. Viewers began noticing the inconsistencies. Comments questioning Maria's story started appearing. Someone wrote that if the restaurant was full, why were there so many empty tables visible? Another commented the man on camera didn't seem to be doing anything wrong. A third observed, this looked a lot like what happened when establishments discriminated against customers based on race. Maria read some of these comments and became defensive, insisting her viewers didn't understand the full situation, that she had every right to choose who she served. And then she said something that was captured live for thousands of people. She said she had worked too hard to build her business to let people like him ruin her reputation. People like him. The words hung in the air, impossible to take back, clearly revealing the prejudice she had denied just minutes earlier. The police arrived 8 minutes later. 2 officers entered the restaurant, both looking around to assess the situation. Maria immediately went to them, her phone still live streaming, and began explaining she had asked Paul to leave, but he was refusing to cooperate. One of the officers, whose badge said Officer Davis, gently asked Maria to turn off the phone so they could talk privately. Maria hesitated, then ended the live stream, but not before thousands of people had watched and recorded everything. The other officer, Officer Kim, approached Paul and asked politely what was happening from his point of view. Paul explained calmly he had entered the restaurant for lunch, that he was informed it was fully booked despite the obvious empty tables, and that when he questioned this, Maria had refused to serve him without any legitimate reason. Paul also showed the officers he had recorded the entire interaction on his phone, offering to let them watch if they wanted. Officer Kim asked to see the video, and Paul played it from the beginning, showing his peaceful arrival, Maria's immediate refusal of service, and the subsequent escalation. Officer Davis was talking separately with Maria, who insisted she had the right to refuse service to anyone, that Paul was being hostile and confrontational. Officer Davis asked Maria directly what was the specific reason for refusing service to Paul. Maria stuttered, saying the restaurant was booked, but when Davis pointed out the multiple empty tables, she changed her story. She said Paul wasn't following the dress code, but Davis observed Paul was wearing a suit, clearly more formal than several of the other customers. Maria then said she simply had a bad feeling about him, that as an owner, she had the right to follow her instincts. Davis shook his head and said feelings weren't legal basis for refusing service, and that if the refusal was based on race, it constituted illegal discrimination. Officer Kim finished watching Paul's video and returned to confer with Davis. They talked in low voices for a moment. Then Davis turned to Maria and said that based on what they had seen and heard, it appeared she had discriminated against a customer based on race, that while business owners had certain rights to refuse service, those rights didn't include discrimination by race, color, or national origin, that what she did was not only morally wrong, but potentially illegal under federal civil rights laws. Maria became defensive, saying the officers were taking sides, that she was the victim here. Davis patiently explained they weren't taking sides, they were simply explaining the law. The officers then informed Maria they weren't going to remove Paul because he had done nothing illegal, and that actually she was the one who could face legal consequences for discrimination. They recommended she either serve Paul or at least let him leave peacefully without further confrontation. Maria refused both options. She said Paul was no longer welcome on her property, period. Officer Kim told Paul he was free to go when ready, that he wasn't being charged with anything, and that if he wanted to file a formal complaint about discrimination, they would provide information on how to do so. Paul thanked the officers, stood up calmly, gathered his belongings, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, Paul turned to Maria and said something that was captured on his video still recording. He said she had had multiple opportunities to do the right thing, to simply serve him like any other customer, but had chosen discrimination, and then had chosen to broadcast her discrimination live to thousands of people, that she hadn't just lost a customer, she had probably lost her business. Maria yelled after him that her business was fine, that her loyal customers would support her, that he didn't know what he was talking about. But deep down, there was a stab of fear in her voice. Because part of her knew Paul was right. What she had done on that live stream, the words she had said, the discrimination she had demonstrated so clearly, wasn't just going to disappear. Paul left Maria's trattoria and went straight to his car. He sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. Then he did what anyone in the social media age would do. He edited his video to include the most important parts, the refusal of service, the clearly visible empty tables, Maria's words about people like him, and the officer's confirmation that it appeared to be discrimination. He posted the video on his Twitter with a simple description. Tried to have lunch today at Maria's trattoria. Was refused service without reason. Recorded everything. Paul had about 2,000 followers, mostly professional contacts and friends. He didn't expect the video to go beyond his immediate circle. He was wrong. The video started being shared immediately. Within an hour, it had 1,000 retweets. Within 3 hours, 10,000. People began searching for Maria's Trattoria's Facebook page and found the live stream Maria had done, which several viewers had saved and reposted. Now, there were two angles of the same story. Paul's video showing his calm perspective and the obvious discrimination, and Maria's own video inadvertently confirming everything, showing the empty tables, capturing her own revealing words. People compared the two videos side by side. There was no denying what had happened. The evidence was irrefutable. Maria's Trattoria's Facebook page was flooded with comments, hundreds, then thousands of people expressing shock, anger, and disappointment. Regular customers saying they would never return, people posting one-star reviews on Yelp, Google reviews, and any other platform they could find. Maria tried to respond to comments, defending her actions, insisting the situation had been misinterpreted, that the video didn't show the complete context. But her responses only made things worse. She kept insisting she had the right to refuse service to anyone, failing to acknowledge the problem wasn't the right itself, but the discriminatory reason behind her exercise of that right. Local journalists picked up the story the next morning. Reporters appeared at Maria's Trattoria asking for an interview. Maria initially refused to speak with the press, but then changed her mind, thinking she could tell her side of the story and regain some public sympathy. It was a catastrophic mistake. During the televised interview, the reporter asked directly why Maria had refused to serve Paul. Maria said he didn't have a reservation. The reporter asked if all the other customers that day had reservations. Maria hesitated, then said some had, and others didn't. The reporter asked what was the difference between Paul and the other customers without reservations who were served. Maria couldn't articulate an answer that didn't reveal prejudice. The interview aired that evening and was disastrous. Clips from it were widely shared online. Civil rights organizations began speaking out. The local NAACP issued a statement condemning Maria's actions and calling for a boycott of the restaurant. Community groups organized peaceful protests outside Maria's trattoria. Signs saying, "Racism not welcome here," and "Boycott discrimination" lined the sidewalk. Maria called the police several times, claiming the protesters were harassing her, but officers confirmed the protests were peaceful and legal. The protesters didn't block the entrance, didn't threaten anyone, just exercised their First Amendment right to protest against discrimination. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. The restaurant's customer traffic dropped 80% in the first week. The few people who still entered often left after seeing the protests or reading online reviews. Suppliers began canceling contracts, not wanting to be associated with a business accused of racial discrimination. Maria's bank called about her business loan, expressing concern about her ability to make payments given the negative publicity. Employees began resigning, not wanting to work for someone publicly accused of racism. In just 10 days after the incident with Paul, Maria's trattoria was operating with half its staff and a quarter of its normal revenue. Maria desperately tried to save her business. She hired a public relations firm that advised her to make a public and sincere apology, admit she was wrong, and commit to real change. But Maria couldn't do that. Every apology attempt she drafted was full of justifications and minimizations. She couldn't simply say she had discriminated against Paul and that she was wrong. Instead, she posted a statement saying she regretted the situation had been misunderstood, that she never intended to offend anyone, and that her restaurant had always been welcoming to all. The statement was met with skepticism and more anger. People pointed out she wasn't apologizing for her actions, just regretting that people were upset. Paul, meanwhile, had hired a civil rights attorney named Jennifer Washington. Jennifer reviewed all the videos, police records, and media coverage. She told Paul he had a solid case of discrimination under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits public accommodations from discriminating based on race. Jennifer explained they could sue Maria's trattoria for compensatory and punitive damages, and that given Maria had essentially admitted the discrimination on video seen by millions, the case was almost indefensible for her. Paul wasn't interested in money as much as accountability. He wanted there to be real consequences so other business owners would think twice before discriminating. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks after the incident. Jennifer didn't just ask for compensation for Paul, but also injunctive relief requiring the restaurant to implement mandatory non-discrimination training for all employees, post clear policies about equal service, and submit to regular audits. The lawsuit also named Maria personally, not just the business, making her accountable for her individual actions. When news of the lawsuit was released, more people came out in support of Paul. A crowdfunding campaign was started to cover his legal costs, even though Jennifer was working on contingency basis. The campaign raised over $50,000 in a few days, with contributors leaving messages of support. Maria hired a lawyer through her business insurance, but he quickly told her her position was almost impossible to defend. The videos were too much evidence. Her own words were too incriminating. He strongly recommended she settle, issue a genuine apology, and try to minimize damages. But Maria was in denial. She insisted on going to trial, convinced a jury would understand she had the right to run her business as she wanted. Her lawyer warned her this was extremely risky, that juries were notoriously hostile to obvious racial discrimination, and that she could end up owing much more if she lost in court instead of settling now. As the lawsuit moved slowly through the legal system, the restaurant continued bleeding money. Maria had to fire more employees. She reduced operating hours. She stopped ordering fresh ingredients, switching to cheaper. Frozen options that ruined the quality the restaurant was known for. Old customers who occasionally still appeared noticed the drop in quality and didn't return. Reviews fell even further. Maria tried to change the restaurant's name, thinking a new name would allow a fresh start. But news of the name change spread online immediately, with people warning it was the same owner, same location, just a different name. The maneuver was seen as cowardly and dishonest, making her reputation even worse. 45 days after the incident with Paul, Maria was forced to admit defeat. The restaurant simply couldn't continue operating with so little revenue. She had depleted her savings, was behind on rent, owed money to suppliers, and faced a lawsuit she didn't have resources to properly fight. Maria announced Maria's Trattoria was closing permanently. The news was met with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice had somehow been served. Sadness because innocent employees lost their jobs, because a space that had served the community for 10 years was closing, and because all of this could have been avoided if Maria had simply served Paul a plate of pasta that Tuesday afternoon. With the restaurant closed, Paul's lawsuit shifted focus. Jennifer Washington amended the complaint to seek damages from Maria personally, since the business entity was effectively bankrupt. Maria tried to declare personal bankruptcy to avoid trial, but Jennifer argued that debts arising from intentional discrimination couldn't be discharged in bankruptcy under certain circumstances. The judge agreed that if intentional discrimination was proven, damages wouldn't be dischargeable. Maria was trapped. She no longer had a business, her savings were gone, and she potentially faced having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages if she lost at trial. Her lawyer finally convinced Maria to settle. Negotiations were tense. Jennifer demanded not just financial compensation, but a public and sincere apology where Maria specifically admitted she had discriminated against Paul based on race. She demanded Maria complete 60 hours of training on racial bias and civil rights, and she demanded Maria never own or operate a public accommodation again without first proving she had completed this training. The final settlement was $120,000, paid over 5 years through garnishment of any future income Maria earned, plus all the other conditions. Maria had no choice but to accept. The public apology was filmed and posted online. Maria sat in front of a camera, looking exhausted and defeated, and read a statement her lawyer had helped draft, but that she had to say in her own words. She admitted she had refused service to Paul Richardson based on the color of his skin, that her actions constituted illegal racial discrimination, that she was wrong and deeply regretted the pain she had caused not just to Paul, but to everyone who witnessed her intolerance, that she had lost her business as a consequence of her own choices, and that no one but herself was to blame, that she hoped her story would serve as a warning to others about the real consequences of discrimination. It was the first genuine acknowledgement of guilt Maria had made, and it came too late to save anything. The apology video was viewed by hundreds of thousands of people. Some accepted it as evidence of genuine growth. Others remained skeptical, seeing it for what it was, a legal requirement rather than real change of heart. Paul watched it and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction that Maria finally admitted what she had done, but also sadness that it had cost the complete destruction of a business and one person's financial ruin for her to finally acknowledge the obvious truth. He said in an interview he hoped Maria really learned from this, but that his focus was on using his platform to create broader change. Paul became a respected voice on discrimination in public accommodations. He spoke at conferences, worked with civil rights organizations, and helped train business owners on how to create truly inclusive environments. He used part of the settlement to establish a program that provided free legal assistance to victims of discrimination in public establishments, knowing many people didn't have resources to fight back as he had. The program helped dozens of people in the first 2 years, validating their experiences and ensuring consequences for discrimination. Maria disappeared from public life after the settlement. She found work as a manager at someone else's restaurant, earning a fraction of what she used to earn as an owner. 20% of her salary was automatically garnished to pay the settlement to Paul. She completed the mandatory training on racial bias, though no one besides her lawyer and the judge supervising the agreement knew if it genuinely changed her attitudes. Some acquaintances said she still saw herself as a victim, that she still blamed Paul for ruining her life, instead of recognizing it was her own actions that caused everything. Others said she had changed, that the experience had been a brutal but necessary lesson. The story of Paul Richardson and Maria Castellano became a case study in how social media had changed accountability for discrimination. Before social media and ubiquitous cell phone cameras, the incident would have been Paul's word against Maria's, probably resulting in nothing but frustration for Paul. But in the modern world, video evidence from multiple angles, instant viral spread, and the ability for rapid community mobilization meant discriminatory actions could have swift and devastating consequences. Business schools began using the case as an example of what not to do, of how a single moment of prejudice captured on video could destroy a business built over a decade. The physical space where Maria's Trattoria operated remained empty for 8 months. Then, it was leased by an African-American family who opened a soul food restaurant called Heritage Kitchen. At the grand opening, Paul was invited as guest of honor. The owners said they had specifically chosen that location because they wanted to transform a space of discrimination into a space of community and inclusion. They knew the history, embraced it, and were determined to ensure every customer was treated with dignity. Paul gave a brief speech at the opening, saying it was fitting that this space now represented the opposite of what it represented before, that from ashes of intolerance, something beautiful and inclusive had grown. In the following years, the case continued to be referenced whenever new incidents of discrimination in public accommodations occurred. Journalists wrote articles comparing new cases to the Maria's Trattoria incident, using it as a reference point for the kind of consequences discrimination could bring. Lawyers cited the settlement in arguments, establishing precedent for what victims of discrimination could reasonably seek in damages. And business owners used the story in trainings, a concrete reminder of why non-discrimination policies weren't just legal requirements, but moral and practical business imperatives. For Paul, the incident never stopped being a painful memory, but he transformed it into purpose. He spoke openly about his experience, never forgetting the humiliation of being judged by the color of his skin instead of his character. But he also spoke about hope, about how the community came together, about how justice was served, and about how change was possible. He encouraged others to document discrimination when they witnessed it, to speak out, and to demand accountability. Because the Maria's Trattoria story proved something important, that in the modern world, with cameras in every pocket and social media connecting millions, actions had consequences, and those who chose discrimination could lose everything they built. Maria Castellano had worked 10 years to build a successful business, and she lost it all in 60 days because she chose to see the color of Paul's skin before seeing his humanity, because she chose to discriminate instead of serve, and because, when confronted with her actions, she chose to double down instead of admitting error and changing. Her story wasn't just about a restaurant closing. It was about the real cost of intolerance in an era where secrets no longer exist, where every action can be captured and shared, and where communities have power to demand justice in ways previous generations never had. The video Maria recorded thinking it would protect her ended up being exactly what ended her career. And the words she said, "People like him," would echo forever as a reminder of why words matter, why actions have consequences, and why in a just society, discrimination cannot and will not be tolerated.